Let me take you deeper into this first idea because it is the foundation upon which everything else rests. If the mind is not shifted, if the pattern of thinking is not rewired, then every strategy, every tactic, and every so-called opportunity will collapse under the weight of old beliefs. The real barrier to wealth is not the absence of money, but the presence of scarcity thinking. Scarcity is not just a financial condition. It is a mental condition. It is the silent assumption that there is never enough. Never enough time, never enough resources, never enough opportunity, and ultimately never enough of you. That assumption becomes a filter through which the brain interprets every possibility. And when the filter is scarcity, your actions are guided by fear, by hesitation, and by self-sabotage. Think about it. When you believe there isn't enough to go around, you compete at the lowest level. You cling to security, you resist risk, and you undervalue yourself. You may even resent those who have more, not realizing that resentment itself is a form of mental poverty. Scarcity convinces you that wealth is a zero-sum game, that someone else's win automatically means your loss. But that is a lie the mind tells to justify staying comfortable in limitation. Wealth in reality is not a pie being divided. It is a pie that expands with creativity, innovation, and courage. The more abundance you believe in, the more your actions actually generate it. Training your brain begins with confronting this lie. It requires you to ask, what if there actually is more than enough? What if opportunities are not limited? But only my vision is limited. This is not wishful thinking, it is neurological retraining. Neuroscience shows us that the brain literally wires itself according to repeated patterns of thought. If you constantly repeat scarcity beliefs, your brain builds pathways that reinforce fear and hesitation. But if you consistently practice abundance beliefs, if you affirm that wealth flows through value, that creativity is endless, that solutions outnumber problems, your brain begins to normalize prosperity. What once felt unrealistic becomes your new standard of thought. Now, this shift doesn't mean ignoring reality or pretending difficulties don't exist. It means interpreting reality through a lens of possibility instead of limitation. Two people can look at the same challenge. One sees a dead end, the other sees an open door. The difference isn't the circumstance, it's the lens. Training your brain for abundance is about polishing the lens until possibility becomes the dominant interpretation. And once that happens, your behavior naturally changes. You take bolder steps. You see connections others miss. You notice opportunities in what others dismiss as failure. Let's make it practical. If you walk into a room and your mind says, everyone here is smarter than me, wealthier than me, more talented than me, then you shrink, you retreat, you sabotage the connections you could have made. But if you walk in and your mind says, there is more than enough space for my gifts, my voice, and my value, then you show up with confidence. You participate fully. And ironically, that confidence attracts the very opportunities that scarcity thinking would have blinded you to. Scarcity also affects how you handle money itself. A scarcity brain spends impulsively because it fears money won't return, or it hoards excessively afraid to release a dollar in case it never comes back. An abundance brain, by contrast, invests wisely. It understands circulation, that money is energy in motion, and motion creates multiplication. The abundance thinker knows that letting money work through investment, through creation, through value exchange does not decrease but expands the flow. But here's the key: you can't fake abundance thinking. You can't simply recite affirmations while still clinging to fear underneath. The shift requires conviction, and conviction requires practice. Every day, you must train your brain to question scarcity and reinforce abundance. When your mind whispers, there's not enough time, challenge it by asking, what if I prioritize differently? When it says, there's not enough opportunity, ask, what if opportunity is created, not found? Slowly, your brain begins to adapt. What you repeat, you rewire. And the irony is this: when you start believing in abundance, you stop chasing money so desperately. And that's often when money starts chasing you, because you're no longer acting from fear, but from creativity. You're no longer shrinking back, but leaning in. The energy shifts, the posture shifts, and people can sense it. Opportunities are drawn to the mind that believes in more, while they hide from the mind obsessed with less. So the first step in training your brain to make more money is not about spreadsheets or strategies. It is about replacing the poverty of thought with the wealth of thought. It is about shifting the default setting of your mind from fear to possibility, from lack to plenty, from survival to creation. Until that shift happens, no technique will matter. But once it does, even the simplest actions begin to multiply. Because here's the truth: you cannot ignore money will never expand in a mind that contracts. It only multiplies in a mind that believes multiplication is possible. If shifting from scarcity to abundance thinking is the foundation, then reprogramming your financial identity is the structure that sits on top of it. You cannot build lasting wealth on a weak self-image, because your behavior will always follow your beliefs about who you are. Most people think income is limited by scation or circumstance, but in truth, income is capped at the level of your identity. If you see yourself as someone who always struggles, you will unconsciously create struggle even when opportunities for success are right in front of you. If you see yourself as someone undeserving of wealth, you will sabotage or reject the very blessings you worked for. Your outer results are nothing more than a mirror reflecting your inner identity. Think about it. When a person wins the lottery, millions of dollars flood into their life. But if their identity is still rooted in lack, in mismanagement, in chaos, that money drains away as quickly as it came. Why? Because the financial identity was not upgraded to match the financial reality. Money without a new identity is like water poured into a cracked vessel. It leaks until it disappears. On the other hand, when someone changes their self-image, even modest resources begin to multiply. That's why two people can start with the same amount of capital, and one creates wealth while the other remains broke. It is not the number in the bank account that matters. It is the identity managing it. Reprogramming your financial identity begins with self-honesty. You must ask, who do I believe I am when it comes to money? Not who do you want to be, but who do you believe you are? Do you see yourself as a spender, as someone who never gets ahead, as someone who is bad with numbers? Or do you see yourself as a creator of value, as someone disciplined, strategic, and capable of growth? The stories you tell yourself about money become the ceiling you live under. Until the story changes, the ceiling remains in place. Now, here is the psychological trap. Most people try to change their actions without changing their identity. They download budgeting apps, read financial tips, or chase side hustles, but underneath it all, they still see themselves as broke, struggling, or not the type of person who ever gets rich. So the behavior doesn't last. They revert to what feels congruent with their identity. Why? Because the human brain craves consistency. If your actions move too far from the person you believe yourself to be, you will unconsciously pull yourself back down to that identity. This is why lasting change is impossible without identity change. To reprogram your financial identity, you must practice what I call internal alignment. That means every day you deliberately align your language, your habits, and your environment with the person you are becoming, not the person you have been. If you want to see yourself as a disciplined wealth builder, then every decision, no matter how small, must reinforce that identity. You may not yet be wealthy, but when you choose to save instead of spend, invest instead of consume, learn instead of waste time, you are casting votes for a new identity. And the more votes you cast, the stronger the identity becomes. There is also a deeper philosophical layer here. Identity is not just what you think about yourself, it is what you permit yourself to embody. Many people unconsciously reject wealth because they don't believe they are worthy of it. They equate money with greed, corruption, or arrogance, and so their brain rejects wealth to remain consistent with being a good person. Reprogramming your financial identity requires breaking those false associations. Money is not moral or immoral, it is a magnifier. It simply amplifies what is already inside you. If you are generous, money will amplify generosity. If you are creative, money will amplify creation. To reject money because you fear corruption is to misunderstand its nature. The question is not whether you are worthy of wealth. The question is whether you are willing to become a steward of it. When your identity shifts, the world begins to respond to you differently. You carry yourself differently. You negotiate differently. You speak with authority instead of hesitation. You pursue opportunities instead of waiting for permission. The identity of a wealth creator is not arrogant. It is responsible. It takes ownership. It says, I am the kind of person who builds, who multiplies, who leaves things better than I found them. That self-image creates behaviors that naturally lead to wealth, not because you force them, but because they are consistent with who you believe yourself to be. Let me leave you with this: money does not change who you are. It only exposes who you already were. If you want your outer world to expand, your inner world must first expand. Upgrade the identity and the income follows. Refuse to upgrade, and the income will always shrink to the level of who you believe you are. Your money will never grow beyond the boundaries of your identity. So the question is not, what do I want to earn? The question is, who must I become? If your mindset has shifted from scarcity to abundance, and if your financial identity has been reprogrammed to match the level of wealth you desire, the next crucial layer is understanding the psychology of value. Because here's the truth most people never confront. You are not paid for your time, you are paid for the value your time creates. Yet so many remain stuck in the old equation of trading hours for dollars, believing that the only path to more money is more effort. That formula traps you because there are only so many hours in a day and only so much energy you can expend. The people who break free, the ones who multiply their income and sustain it, are those who train their brains to ask, not how hard can I work, but how much value can I create? This is not just a business principle, it's a universal principle. Think about the difference between water from a sink and water from a luxury brand bottle. Same substance, but the perceived value changes the price dramatically. The hours are the same, but the packaging, the delivery, the experience, those elements create value in the marketplace. And the brain that understands value begins to see opportunity where others only see labor. Most people have been conditioned to equate effort with worth. If they didn't sweat, strain, and sacrifice, they feel guilty charging for their work. That's scarcity training disguised as humility. But wealth operates on a different law. Effort alone is not the currency. Results are. If your brain is locked in the effort equation, you'll resist innovation, automation, and leverage because somewhere deep inside, you don't feel like you've earned the money unless you bled for it. That's not noble. That's limiting. The wealth-creating brain retrains itself to equate value delivered with worth, not exhaustion endured. Here's the psychology of value in practice. When you shift your identity to, I am a wealth creator, you begin to see your skills, your knowledge, your ideas as assets. You ask, how can this solve problems for more people? Instead of, how many hours can I sell this for? You begin to look at leverage, books, courses, businesses, systems that allow the same unit of effort to create exponential results. That's not laziness, that's stewardship. A farmer doesn't plant one seed at a time and hope for survival. He plants in rows because he understands multiplication. The brain trained for value works the same way. The deeper layer of this is philosophical. Value is created when you move someone from a lower state to a higher state. When you relieve pain, when you solve a problem, when you create joy, when you save time, you are adding value. And the amount of money you make is directly tied to the size of problems you are willing to solve. If you only solve problems that affect one person, your income remains small. If you solve problems that affect hundreds, thousands, or millions, your income multiplies. The brain trained for value doesn't ask, why isn't money coming to me? It asks, what problem can I solve so effectively that money cannot ignore me? But there's a catch. You cannot truly master value until you stop measuring yourself against effort. If you still tie your self-worth to working harder than the next person, you will unconsciously cap your income. Because eventually, you can't work harder. Eventually, your energy runs out. But when you train your brain to think in terms of value, you discover that wealth is not about adding hours, it's about adding impact. The brain begins to search for leverage points, technologies, Systems partnerships that multiply your output without multiplying your exhaustion. Now, notice how this ties directly to identity. If you see yourself as just a worker, you will look for tasks. But if you see yourself as a value creator, you will look for opportunities. The same person with the same skills and the same circumstances can either remain stuck in effort or rise through value, depending on what their brain is trained to focus on. Let me make this concrete. A person might spend 8 hours baking bread and make a small income selling loaves one by one. Another person with the same skill bakes bread, but then creates a system, a bakery, a brand, a franchise. Same effort at the start, but multiplied by systems, multiplied by people, multiplied by vision. That's the psychology of value in action. Wealth is not about effort. It is about designing the flow of value so that it outpaces the limitations of time. So the challenge becomes this: are you training your brain to work harder or to create more value? One path leads to exhaustion and limits, the other to multiplication expansion. If you shift your focus from labor to leverage, from hours to impact, your income begins to reflect that new equation. Here is the principle in one sentence: money is the shadow of value. Wherever value is created and expanded, money follows. Train your brain to multiply value, and money cannot help but multiply with it. If you've embraced abundance over scarcity, if you've reprogrammed your identity to match wealth, and if you've trained your mind to pursue value instead of just effort, there is still one final layer that determines whether all of it produces consistent results: discipline of focus and mastery of emotional state. Because the truth is, your brain can be filled with vision, belief, and strategy, but if it is scattered or reactive, your wealth will remain unstable. Money is attracted to order and repelled by chaos. If your inner world is disorganized, if your focus is divided, if your emotions control you instead of you controlling them, then your financial results will mirror that instability. The brain is not naturally wired for focus. It is wired for survival. And survival thinking is easily distracted, always scanning for threats, reacting to impulses, chasing the urgent at the expense of the important. That's why training the brain requires discipline. Focus is not a natural gift, it is a cultivated habit. In a world filled with endless noise, distractions, and temptations, the person who masters focus automatically gains an advantage over those who drift. Because while others are busy chasing everything, you are busy building something. Now let's talk about emotions. Wealth requires decisions, and decisions are often made in moments of uncertainty. If your emotional state is unstable, you will make decisions that shrink your future to preserve your comfort. Fear will tell you not to invest. Impatience will push you into shortcuts. Envy will make you compare your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20. Discipline of the mind means learning how to recognize those emotions without being ruled by them. It means saying, yes, I feel fear, but fear is not the decision maker. Yes, I feel envy, but envy will not guide my choices. Yes, I feel doubt, but doubt does not determine my destiny. The brain that is trained for wealth does not eliminate emotions, it governs them. Philosophically, this is where self-mastery and wealth creation converge. Ancient thinkers often spoke of virtue as the highest wealth, because the person who cannot govern himself cannot govern resources. And money, at its core, is a resource. If you cannot govern focus, money will slip through distraction. If you cannot govern emotions, money will vanish in impulsive choices. The wealthiest people are not simply those who make the most. They are those who keep and multiply the most. And keeping and multiplying requires stability of focus and strength of character. Let's make this practical. Focus means you set priorities and protect them. It means you do not confuse business with progress. Too many people scatter their energy across dozens of half-hearted pursuits, then wonder why nothing grows. Training your brain for wealth means disciplining yourself to plant deeply in fewer fields, to nurture those fields, and to wait for the harvest instead of running from one plot to another. That requires patience, and patience is emotional discipline in action. It also means mastering delayed gratification. Wealth creation is rarely instant. The brain trained for instant pleasure will sabotage long-term prosperity. If you need the quick dopamine hit of spending, you will never experience the compounding effect of investing. If you cannot resist the comfort of today, you will rob yourself of the abundance of tomorrow. Training your brain is about rewiring that response, choosing long-term reward over short-term impulse until the discipline becomes second nature. And here's the subtle truth. Focus is not just about what you pursue, it's also about what you ignore. You must ignore distractions disguised as opportunities. You must ignore the noise of people who don't understand your vision. You must ignore the urge to prove yourself through comparison. The wealth-creating brain says no far more often than it says yes, because every yes dilutes your focus, and dilution is the enemy of multiplication. At the same time, emotional mastery requires that you do not let external circumstances dictate your inner state. The market will rise and fall. Clients will say yes and no. Opportunities will come and go. If your emotions rise and fall with every wave, you will never hold steady long enough to reach shore. Training your brain means anchoring your state in principles, not in circumstances. You choose to stay centered, even when things around you are unstable. That steadiness becomes magnetic. People trust leaders who do not panic. Money flows to those who project stability. The integration of focus and emotional mastery is what transforms potential into lasting prosperity. Without it, you may rise, but you will not remain. With it, even small beginnings can compound into greatness because your consistency becomes unstoppable. So let me leave you with this thought: the world will always test your focus, and life will always provoke your emotions. The question is not whether you will feel distraction or fear. The question is whether you will remain disciplined enough to choose purpose over impulse. Because in the end, money is not just earned, it is stewarded. And stewardship requires mastery of the mind. Your wealth will never exceed your ability to focus, and it will never outlast your ability to remain steady. Master those two disciplines, and you will not only make money, you will multiply it, keep it, and build something that endures.